Please be seated. Good morning, everyone. I am Chaplain Miosha Wilson. Thank you. I get the privilege of leading the team at Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, which is in Washington, D.C. So welcome to the National Capital Region for another edition of the summit. So our esteemed panelists have been introduced already, but I want to give them an opportunity to provide some opening remarks in turn. So we'll begin with you, Secretary Kendall.
Thank you. How's the mic? Sounds like it's okay. It's good to be with you again this year, particularly with the only two remaining confirmed service chiefs in the Pentagon. Yeah. I'm happy about the fact that I still have mine, but I really wish we could get everybody else confirmed as well. And General Brown here is another job waiting for him, I understand. I'm going to say just a couple of things, and I'm really looking forward to the questions. My priorities as Secretary have been pretty clear, I think, since the day I walked in. China, 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 right? But I divide my job into two parts. One is about that. It's the things we need to do to be competitive against our so-called pacing challenge. And the other is about overarching goal of leaving the whole enterprise, the Department of the Air Force, in a stronger place than I found it when I came in. An enormous amount of that is about people. It's about airmen and guardians and their families and all the myriad of things we do to try to help them thrive, help them be as capable as possible at doing their jobs, and have their lives be as rewarding and fulfilling and as possible. And so Secretary Austin has been a great leader in this regard. He's done a number of things that are about basically quality of life. Your role is critical, and I think the first thing I want to say is thank you for what you do. It's enormously valuable to our airmen and guardians and their families. The spiritual life, mental health, all of those things that really are about how people feel about their lives and what they're doing, and how successful they're being and their purposefulness and so on. All that whole range of things that make you human, basically. You have an enormously important role in. And spiritual lives are incredibly important to all of us, and we recognize that, all of us up here do. We are facing a set of challenges, I think, internally and externally, like I've never seen. I talked a lot about my 20 years of Cold War experience and what that was like. And I was thinking earlier about how about 30 years ago, I look back on what was in some ways a different America. Cold War had been won. We were entering a period of, we thought, protracted peace. 9/11 had not happened yet. We had our political divisions, but they were not nearly as severe as they are today. And now, we thought we were on a course towards a century of relative calm and peace, and that's not where we are. We're in a century which instead includes threats like we've never seen before. I think China is a more formidable threat than the Soviet Union ever was. We have violent extremists still around the world. We have an aggressive Russia. We have rogue nations like North Korea and Iran. So we have a real range of problems, and the threat of China is as sophisticated, as technologically capable, and has scale and global ambitions, which I think in many cases are even worse from a point of view of a threat than the Soviet Union was. But we also have deep internal divisions, and we're entering into it's going to be, I think, a very interesting year. We are apolitical, including myself, and in this role anyway. And the military has had a long tradition of being very apolitical in this country. We're going to continue that, but we're going to have to all do our jobs, and you in particular, in a very difficult climate, I think, over the next year. I don't want to shy away from talking about that a little bit. We've had some conversations in the staff meetings for the department and so on about this, where as an institution, we have to stay outside of and above that. But we can't avoid being touched by it, and we can't avoid our people being touched by it. And you can help us, I think, as we go through that, making sure people stay focused on their mission, making sure people stay focused on the role that they have for the country and the apolitical job that we have to keep the country safe and to protect all the things that we value the most. Our democratic institutions, the Constitution that we all took an oath to support. The other point that I want to make is that, and I'm thinking about this as I was coming over, I would like to get more feedback from you. We're doing a lot of things that impact our people. You hear more directly from our people than probably anybody else except within their own families. And without obviously betraying any privacy or confidentiality, getting feedback from this community about what's on the minds of our people, what's troubling them, what's bothering them, what's affecting their mental health, what's affecting all the issues that we care about. There's a whole range of them I don't need to go into. Would be enormously valuable to us, I think, to all of us up here and to leaders in general across the department. So would appreciate finding ways to connect more than we have been, quite frankly, from my perspective, and hear more from you about what you're seeing and ideas you might have about what we can do to improve the lives of our airmen and guardians and their families. So thank you again for what you do. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. I'm really looking forward to some really interesting questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I'm also real honored to be here. And I think I missed you last year because I may have been on leave, which starts tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. So perfect timing. You know, one of the things that as I sit here as a chief and think about what the secretary just laid out about the geostrategic environment, all those pressures that we have on us, I also think about, you know, the broader perspective of what we do as leaders. And when I think about that, I think about all of us as leaders. And there's a quote from St. Ignatius of Loyola, and he said, "Love is shown more in deeds than in words." And it's the aspect of not what we say, but what we do. Because there's a lot of talk about all the things we could do. And I think one thing that frustrates me about working on the air staff is I get briefs and they say, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. I go, so don't tell me what we could do, tell me what we're going to do. And what are the things we need to be doing to support our airmen, guardians, and their families? And how do we enable all of us to reach our full potential? And it's the little things that I think we do. There's a lot of big programs, as I say, there's a lot of good ideas that come out of the Pentagon until they hit your base. And so it's the aspect of the secretary talked about getting feedback, and so we can pat ourselves in the back about a good program we think we put together, but once it gets and has first contact at your base, we realize it probably is not hitting the mark, or it's too prescriptive and it doesn't allow you to adapt it to what you need to do. And then we're very focused on compliance of executing the program versus the impact and effect that we have with the program when it's all said and done. And so that'll be part of what I hope we get out of today with some of the conversation. I will share with you one of the things that I do when I travel and do base visits is I always go and have either a breakfast or lunch with about 10 to 12 airmen. And the only people in the room are me and my special assistant, and I don't allow the wing leadership to be in the room. And I always ask, you know, I talk to airmen about why they joined and the things that, how they stay resilient. And I always ask this question: what do you want from your leadership? And the resounding answer I get is I want them to care about me and know me as a person. It's pretty simple. And that's the aspect of when the CSAF and I put the memo out on Airmen's Time. That's what that was about. It's hard to know that an airman that works for you is having a bad day if you don't know what a good day looks like because you don't know them. And it's the things that leaders should be doing. And we shouldn't put all the pressure on our professionals, whether it's our chaplains, whether it's our mental health professionals. It's about leadership. And this is how you help enable leadership. And it's the tools that you have here in the Chaplain Corps and how you share that with our leaders to help them better lead, and the techniques and tools you have as counselors and how you're able to take on other people's very difficult problems and help them work through those. I think the other thing you also got to think about is how do you take care of yourselves? Because of those of us in leadership and those in these pressures that are getting everybody else's problems, doesn't mean we're devolving our own problems and own stressors. And what are we doing to take care of ourselves? And that's why the spectrum of resilience. I put that in as partly of how do you take care of yourself, all the way through those that can help, that you can connect with, and before you get to a mental health professional or to a chaplain. And it's how do we work together as a team, and those are the things that I think about. I would also share with you that every one of you has probably impacted somebody, and you probably don't realize it. And I think the same thing happens in leadership. It's amazing sometimes I go places and someone will come up to me and say, General Brown, you said, did, and I don't even remember it, but it had an impact. And I think one of my first, as an Air Force officer, first real connections with a chaplain was when I was a lieutenant at Kunsan, Chaplain Harry Reed. The thing that really amazed me was, and it was interesting because we'd have our mass briefs during our big exercises, and the chaplain would say a prayer before we go step out the aircraft. It was almost like when I was in high school, we'd say the Lord's Prayer before we step out. We had a losing team, but we still prayed. But it was just that connection. And then when I went to Air Command and Staff College, Chaplain Reed was in my seminar. And so, that connection, I mean, I'll never forget it, just the things that he was able to do. And we would play Amazing Grace on the bagpipes in the background before we go out to get everybody pumped up. And it's those kinds of things that, for me personally, because of my faith and because of how I think about things, it was just, it's always stuck with me. And the impact he had on me. I mean, I don't remember any of the prayers he said, but I do remember him. And every one of you has an impact. And I think we all as leaders have an opportunity to continue to impact those that we're privileged to lead, or privileged to be in support of. And again, I want to thank you all for being here, coming together. And there's probably some real power in this room today by all of you being here. And hopefully what we shared with you today will help all of us. I mean, all of us, when I include the three of us up here, to be better in supporting our airmen guardians and their families. Thank you.
Well, let me be the third to say how honored we are to be here and talking with you. And I think it's probably pretty clear that the reason we're honored is because we see you as force multipliers. A couple of hundred people, but we know the impact that you're going to have. Every single base, the detailed conversation you're going to have with our airmen and guardians. It's an unbelievable opportunity to deliver a message to the people that can touch the entire force and touch it in a very personal way. And so thanks for the opportunity to do this. And that is exactly how I see you. And I appreciate seeing some of the Space Force patches out there. I know that, this is the Space Force Chaplain Corps as much as it is the Air Force. And I can't thank you enough for all you do out in the field to make sure the spiritual well-being of our airmen and our guardians are attended to. So thank you for that, and thanks for this great opportunity. I thought what I'd do is maybe talk a little bit about how I see some of the benefits that you provide. And I think about the lines of effort that I kind of came into the job thinking about. And first and foremost, to Secretary Kendall's point, we have to produce ready, resilient, combat-credible forces. And we have to all see that that is our primary objective, because in the profession of arms, that's what we do. And so you have to be out there to tell us when things aren't ready, when things aren't resilient. And you know all of the intangibles that go into that. It's not just about there's ammunition, the gun works. There's more to it than that, and I know you know that. And so we appreciate the feedback, as Secretary Kendall said. The second line of effort that I have, maybe a little more intangible, I call it amplifying the guardian spirit. And this is what I want to leave you with, is what does that mean? That feels a little esoteric, a little philosophical, but I'm convinced that if you're a young person and you raise your hand to defend your nation, something's inside of you. Something says, I'm not in this for the money. I'm thinking about things that are bigger than myself. I want to be a part of a world-class team that's doing work that's more meaningful than what I might individually be able to contribute in another way. That's a very special thing to be in someone. And then they come into the military, and I don't want to let them down. And I think they come in with this idea. I just call it the guardian spirit because I'm in the Space Force, but that same spirit, that same ideal lives in all of the people that I think are willing to raise their hand. And the key is, does our leadership, do our support structures amplify that spirit, or does it kind of crush it over time? You know that our words, our actions, our deeds have the power to motivate and destroy. And we rarely mean to destroy, we don't mean to crush, but sometimes the bureaucracy, sometimes the demands, sometimes the stress, it just gets in the way of what I would say is more broadly amplifying that spirit. And we know we can't pay these people enough, not nearly enough, for the valuable contributions they make. We have to appeal to those intangibles. We have to appeal to that satisfaction that comes with saying, hey, I had this spirit, I had this inspiration when I came into this service, and it was returned on me fourfold, fivefold. That's why people stay, because they know they're doing valuable work. They know they're a part of a team that respects them, that cares for them, knows who they are, knows what they can contribute, and they feel worthy of such a tremendous challenge, which is defending our nation and its values. And the second piece of this is, what are those values? And for the Space Force, we talk about character, courage, connection, and commitment. Those are just words until people bring them to life. And when it's actions that become habits, that become a mindset, then they're really core values. And I think we're early enough in our journey as Guardians in the Space Force that maybe they're still just words. Like, I wonder sometimes. We pick those 4 words because we think they have extra special meaning to us. But now it takes leaders and it takes people out there with the Guardians on a day in and day out basis to give them a vocabulary, give them lessons, give them anecdotes, show them how these actions, show how these words can become more than just words, actions and habits, and ultimately a mindset. Again, I think if you're committed to those kinds of things, then it starts to amplify that spirit. If you have the courage to stand up for what you believe, if you have the character to say that's not right, this is the better way to do it. If you can connect with people at a personal level and bring them in and make them more resilient, and if you have that commitment that says, I'm all in, I can do this, but we have to give them that vocabulary, we have to give them those actions, we have to show them the way and turn these ideas, these words, into practical actions. I think that's one of the charges that this group has, that all of our leadership has, is really amplifying the Guardian spirit. And I mean that in the broadest sense of the term, of what it means to raise your hand and say, I'm going to give up a lot of my personal conveniences, a lot of things that are going to create family stress. I'm going to give those things up in order to defend my nation. And it's just a powerful charge, and I think it's up to us to make sure we live up to it, though. And I look forward to working with you on how best to go about that. And like Secretary Kendall said, getting the feedback from the field. What's going well that we need to double down on? What's not going well that we need to take a look at and perhaps mitigate? But with that, let me stop. I really look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to each of you. I want to remind us that the app, as well as QR code that was on the screen earlier, is available to you to submit your questions, comments that you have for our panelists. So please take the time to either use the QR code or use the app to submit your questions. So gentlemen, I'm going to give each of you a question before you answer any of the questions so that you have opportunity to think about them. Secretary Kendall, your question will be, as we operate more in joint environments, how do you envision the Chaplain Corps strengthening collaboration with other service branches and interagency partners to create a more unified spiritual support network? General Brown, your question will be, how have you seen the Chaplain Corps evolve over the years that reflect accelerating change? And General Saltzman, to go back to one of your points about the Guardian spirit and the kind of people and leaders we need to be, there's one question that came in about toxic leadership. So your question is, how can the Chaplain Corps come alongside leaders to help curb toxic leadership? So Secretary Kendall, over to you, sir.
Yeah, a question about jointness and how the Chaplains Corps can contribute to that, basically. I think there are a lot of ways you can, and I'm grateful for the time while you ask the other questions to think about it a little bit. There are two things that come to mind right away. One is that we have a lot of joint bases. And frankly, I think there's not an excess of spiritual support for people in our military in general. So I'm hopeful that, and you got to give me some feedback on this, that our chaplains and chaplains associated with the other services don't think of themselves as confined to only taking care of people in their service, so to speak. That we work together much more broadly than that and kind of pool our resources, because I think we have limited resources, and when we work together we can be more effective. We can also learn a lot from each other, both as individuals and as organizations. So I'm one team, one fight includes a lot of jointness as well as other things. It also includes some international aspect to it. The other place where I think it may play, in peacetime on joint basis certainly, in general working with other communities, chaplain corps from other services, but also I think if we find ourselves into a conflict like we might be in with China, where our air bases are under attack, where we're using agile combat employment to send people forward, we're not going to be fighting alone. We're going to be at locations, and I think you're going to be there with our people, and it'll be a joint environment. There will be people from other services around, whether it's the Army protecting us or the Marines or whatever. And the services that you provide, the support you provide to our people is going to be valuable to whoever's there and whoever needs it. So I think we're going to have to just have a lot of flexibility and work as cooperatively with those associated with other services as we can. So that's basically my reaction to the question.
Thank you, sir.
On change, I think there's some things that are foundational about the Chaplain Corps, but then at the same time, we got to understand the environment we operate within. Secretary Kendall in his opening remarks kind of highlighted the geostrategic environment that we're in today. But I also think about the various generations of those represented in this room and those that aren't in this room that are much younger than some of us. And the things that we've got to think about are the things that we do to help connect with them. And I think the fact that you have a QR code up here passing questions is, that is not something we would have done a few years ago. And so how do we continue to adapt and move forward? I think the aspect of True North, and when True North started, I was in a joint position, so I didn't know much about True North. And when I got to become the commander of Pacific Air Forces, and then figured out that the Air Force was not going to be able to afford True North at every location, what I told our PACAF chaplain and the rest of the team there, we're going to do True North Light, which means we're going to have the same kind of thought process, but we're just not going to be able to fund it. And what that really meant was trying to get our chaplain corps and other parts of the mental health corps out of their office and engage in building those connections. And I think that's an aspect of change. And I think the last thing I'd probably say on this is some of that change needs to happen at the grassroots level, but then we got to be able to ensure that we provide you the top cover to be able to go execute. And how do we scale it? And because there's a lot of good ideas that happen at a lower level. And unfortunately, sometimes those good ideas get stifled or we don't have the crosstalk because many of you may be doing the same thing at various locations, but then how do we pull that together and then give it some overall Department of the Air Force top cover to continue to resource it appropriately to make sure that we're able to move it forward. And so I'm always, as one of my counterparts said, good ideas have no rank. And so there's a lot of good ideas. It's just now a matter of if we really believe in it, are we willing to push forward and put those good ideas that will drive change and make the Chaplain Corps more effective and more effective in the background. What I mean by that, it's not that you don't try to get the headlights, but it's all the things you do to make us better as an Air Force and as a Space Force and as a department. And I think those are things we want to all collectively continue to work on. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Toxic leadership. I can assure you there are no junior officers, junior NCOs saying, I can't wait to be a toxic leader. So They are not learning lessons about how to become toxic leaders in a conscious, deliberate way. There's no part of the Department of the Air Force that says, here are the keys to leadership, and they end up being toxic. So how do you get there? Like, how does it happen? And I think we have to look at kind of both sides of the equation and say that really, obviously, we're going to deal with toxic leadership anytime we see it. That's the easy part of this equation. The question is, how do we get to that point? What was it along the journey that turned, again, somebody that's willing to raise their hand and be a part of a team in their junior years and turn them into a toxic leader, or create an environment, a leadership environment where there's toxicity? And I think we owe it to ourselves to look back at stressors, at demands, at maybe a thought process where the ends justify the means. Like, you know, there's small little things that happen along the journey that ends up with somebody learning the wrong lessons. I can order people to do things, and they have to do it because I have rank. What? I can assure you, we realize that no matter how much rank you have, you don't just order people and they just, we're all on board. That is just not the most effective way to build teams. And so it requires an assessment of how are we teaching leadership. And I think we've gone to great lengths to make sure that people have the skills they need, but we have to, along the way, evaluate and mentor when we see people off the path. And I think sometimes we think about, hey, that's a problem. I just don't have time to deal with that. I don't have time to course correct that. I'm not a confrontational person. It's not in my nature to do that. All those little decisions along the way ultimately could culminate and create the situation, the perfect storm that results in toxic leadership. And I think it is the exception, not the rule, obviously. But I think it's because we have to monitor. We have to understand that it is a journey of 1,000 steps to get to a leadership position. And any of those steps could start to inform and start to manipulate you in a way that makes you think that this is the way to do business. And so I see toxic leadership not for what it is when it's in full bloom and we've got to eradicate it. That's not a hard part. I'm looking at the failure of mentoring, the failure of discussions early on, the failure of constructive feedback. It says this is not the right way to do business. That's harder, but it's more critical rather than just trying to stamp out the fires when they occur. The prior prevention, right? The fire prevention, but more than fire fighting is a better approach. An ounce of prevention more than a pound of cure. We know all these kind of monikers that help us along these paths. It's just, can we do the work? Can we grab somebody and mentor them? Can we grab somebody and say, it's not acceptable. This is not how we do business in the Air Force, in the Space Force. This is not how we do business. Here's the right way to deal with this situation. And then recognize that we put a lot of stressors on people. A lot of stressors. We cut resources. We add mission. We say, you got to step up here. The nation's counting on you. The guilt that comes with staying at work a little later because you got to get something done, and then you go home and the pressures of family that you're not attending to create a different, all of those things. I know I'm literally preaching to the choir here. Sorry. But it does feel like that, right? All these little things set up the environment. And so we're the tripwires. We're the tripwires. Are we looking at the junior people and saying, hold on, there's a better way to do this? And providing them the kind of counseling so that we just don't result in that perfect storm of consequences that could lead to toxic leadership. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. So I'm going to pull the thread just a bit, starting with the next round of questions. I'll read all three, but I'll start with you, Secretary Kendall. Can you give thought to your advice to toxic followership? How would the Chaplain Corps come alongside helping curb toxic followership? General Brown, there is a specific question that came in for you that says, I have an airman at my base who is nervous to seek a religious accommodation for her hijab due to inherent stigma in the force. She asked me a question that I've wanted to ask our leaders for quite some time. If a characteristic, be it hijabs, beards, long hair on a male Native American airman, etc., is seen as professional enough to wave, why can it not be seen as professional enough to just be authorized? There is a perceived double standard regarding professional image that hurts airmen's feelings of belonging. And General Saltzman, your question, sir, will be, what lessons have we learned from the Russia-Ukraine war that are key areas we need to innovate in to set us up for success for future conflicts? Over to you, Secretary Kendall.
Okay. I'm gonna stand up and I'm gonna move my chair up because I know there are a bunch of people over here who have a great view of this podium, right? And yeah, okay. I'm gonna move it up. Salty, you got the same problem, I think, on your side. All right. And that gave me a little more time to think about the question, too. Toxic followership. It's an interesting concept. I hadn't thought about it actually that much. Toxic leadership, we all, I think, have perhaps had some degree of experience with occasionally. What I think is implied by that is undermining the people you work for. And I've seen that happen also. I've seen people who did not support the people they worked for and basically poisoned the atmosphere of the unit they were in and distracted from the mission accomplishment, from the leadership role of the people that they worked for. It happens occasionally when, everybody seen the Caine Mutiny? Famous movie, Humphrey Bogart. And for me, the most interesting scene in that movie, he's a captain of a destroyer in post-World War II. It's at peacetime, but he's basically mentally not sound, and he's doing some very arbitrary things. He's a toxic leader in some ways. And the crew effectively mutinies against him. And at the end of the movie, the prosecutor, he's court-martialed, and the captain is, and he's convicted. He's basically, he breaks down. Famous scene where Humphrey Bogart's playing with ball bearings or something. But anyway, to get to the question, at the end of the movie, the prosecutor, I think, takes the people who mutinied into a room. They were court-martialed for mutiny. And he says to the effect of, this guy was a World War II veteran. He was in combat repeatedly under an enormous amount of stress and was traumatized by it. And that was the reason that he was behaving in such a toxic way. And the crew, instead of helping him do a better job and understanding that and supporting him, undermined him and basically set a trap and eventually mutinied against him. So that's an extreme example of, I think, toxic followership in a way. There's a point at which if you've got toxic leadership, you need to do something about it in terms of reporting it, and the things you would do internally to try to call that to somebody's attention just don't work at some point. But undermining the people you're working for basically undermines you. And if you're not supporting the people you're working for, why would you expect the people who work for you to support you? And I have seen that on a couple of occasions over my long period in national security. There is such a thing as toxic followership, and it's when people are not they may be doing lip service, but they're not fully committed to and supporting the people that have authority that they're working for. And I imagine Salty and CQ may have some experiences with something like this too. It's incredibly unhealthy. It undermines the organization, undermines its effectiveness. It poisons the unit against the leadership when people should be supporting and helping the leadership do a better job. It's a discipline issue, obviously, within the unit, and then you've got to identify it if you're a leader and try to do something about it as quickly as you can. I think it's relatively rare, quite frankly. I have not, well, I don't know that I have seen it or not seen it, but I don't think it happens very often. I think our system works reasonably well. One thing that in the Air Force in particular that I've discovered in getting to know the culture better, my own military history is Army. And the Air Force is quite different culturally from the Army, at least as the Army I used to know. in that it's a much more collegial organization. It's much more leadership by explanation and persuasion than by pure authority. And I think that creates a healthier organization, particularly given the types of things that we do. And it's an environment in which I think toxic leadership can be particularly debilitating. And I think you can probably, as you talk to people and counsel them, help us identify that and help us deal with it where it does occur. But fortunately, I think I went on for a long time about the question, but fortunately, I think it's fairly rare. I'd actually like to ask the chiefs, because you got much more troop leading experience with the Air Force and Space Force. You want to comment on that real quickly?
Yeah, I think part when you think about toxic leadership, it is the thing I think about is, or excuse me, toxic followership. It's the aspect of being a bystander.
Yeah.
Okay, so which enables toxic leadership, and its ability for someone to speak up and try to engage with the member, whoever the leader is. And I think all of us in leadership have to have some trusted agent that can come to us and tell us, you know what you're doing, it's probably not working out like you thought, to be able to get some level of feedback. And then, on top of that, it's the rest of the team actually figuring out the best way to help the organization. Because that one toxic leader, if everybody's following and not doing anything, then it impacts the entire organization. And I realize sometimes it's difficult to engage on some of these topics. And unfortunately, too often it happens after the person has gone down to the next location. And it doesn't help us in leadership to know there was an issue that we weren't aware of, because it's like a ladder. If you're looking down, it's all smiles. If you're looking up, there's a whole nother view. And so we don't get to see that view sometimes, and we need to hear about it from the followers to help us and help that leader and mentor. And it goes to the mentoring part that General Saltzman talked to. But the followers got to feel comfortable enough that they can speak up if there's an issue and someone's going to do something about it.
I think those are exactly right. I would just maybe add followers that routinely, and I mean followers, there's subordinate commands all the way down. You always have a boss that are willing and even desire to pass risk and accountability up the chain. If it's your responsibility, if it's your mission, it's something that's been given to you, and you're willing to pass it up, I think it can set the conditions where toxic leadership could happen. And here's why I think that. If you're not willing to do your job, if you're not willing to assume the responsibility for the task that you've been given, and you keep passing accountability and responsibility back up the chain, you're setting two conditions. One is you're increasing stress on a smaller part of the organization. And then secondly, what you're saying is that the leader has all the best ideas. The senior-most person in the organization is the only one that can solve our problems. All we can do is find the problems and we pass them up the chain. So you start to build this idea in the top that we have to be the ones that burden all the stress. And the only way to deal with that is to be directive. And nobody can solve the problems of this organization other than at the very top. Those are conditions, I think, that start to inform toxic leadership. If you look back on, hey, how did we get here? High levels of stress and a leader that thinks they're the only one that can make decisions usually is a part of that. And so followers that are willing to pass up those decisions and pass up that stress back up the chain, I think, are enablers of what might become toxic leadership.
You've got a topic coming up on respect, and I think it's failure to respect the leaders and their role is at the heart of toxic followership.
Okay, I remember my question. So if I could paraphrase the question, it would be, why have accommodations? Just make everything approved. Think about it. We're a uniformed military organization, and the key word is uniformed. And so there's an aspect of the things that we will do as part of a uniformed military organization, at the same time to accommodate those that have special needs or whatever, whether it's religious, whether it's for various other demographics. And I think we've come a long way from where we were probably several years ago. And because we're part of a uniformed military organization, I think the other aspect is we're part of the Department of Defense, and the Secretary talks about one team, one fight. And so for us as an Air Force, just to go off and left field and go start doing something completely different. We've got to stay aligned as part of a joint team. Okay, and I will just tell you right now, if you spent, those who have spent time in this town, some of the things we've got to be careful, we got to hit it right down the middle. Take care of our airmen and guardians at the same time, as I say, don't draw fire on our own target, because you might imagine, as part of my confirmation preparation, I prepped for some of these very difficult, challenging questions that people were going to ask. They had nothing to do with warfighting. Okay? The power of a team like our United States Air Force, like our Space Force, like our joint team, is the diversity it brings in. And there's some that don't see it that way. The thing we got to think about too as we do this and move forward is the balance between uniform military organization and the individuality that some of our members want. And so there's a balance there. And when you join an organization, you also have to understand there are certain things that you are able to do and not able to do. Whether it's the U.S. military or it's working at Chick-fil-A, they're going to tell you certain things, and there's a balance there. And then you determine as an individual what I want to be able to do. And folks, I know folks want to serve, but at the same time, we've got to kind of balance where we are. The last thing I'll say, kind of associated with this, one of the things I do is I meet with our Barrier Access Working Group champions, our general officers and SESs, on a recurring basis, because what one demographic might want will step on the toes of another demographic. I want to make sure that as we do these things that we don't create division within the force as we're trying to increase inclusion. And that is a challenge. Depending on where you sit, you may have a completely different perspective on what one demographic has that you don't, or vice versa. And so we got to think about, as you build a team, you're trying to build a team that's not a one size fits all, but it's a one size fits most. Okay, and this is where many of you come in with some of the accommodations that you have to make decisions on. And it's how do we work together to ensure we're being accommodating to those airmen and guardians, at the same time thinking about the greater institution. And with time, in some of these, we've made changes, and I think you've been able to see that. And it won't be a flip of a switch that if someone has an idea, we're just going to, it's all the income free with all the good ideas, and we'll quit wearing uniforms and show up to work in khakis and polos. That's not what we do, and that's the part of the bigger perspective that I think we as leaders have to be able to explain. There's some things we'll be able to do, some other things we'll have to work through. Think about it. Last month was the Executive Order 99801 that desegregated the armed services. Okay? The reason why I bring that up is that took some time to get there. And many of the things that some of our airmen are asking for take some time to get there. Sometimes some of those things we'll get to, some of the things we may not get to. But it will take time, and it's the aspect of the dialogue that we have of why it's important and what we're going to be able to do. And there's some things we'll be able to do and some things we may not be able to do. But the key part is we want to take care of them to the best of our ability. At the same time, have a strong team that is focused on warfighting. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
My question was on lessons learned from Ukraine. And there are, first, as you all well know, there are many tactical, technical lessons that are being learned. As you watch a modern war play out in Eastern Europe, we're seeing those technical things that we're paying attention to. But in my mind, the broader lessons are a little more wide sweeping than that. And for me, first and foremost, the lesson that I've learned is you can have the greatest equipment that the planet has to offer and fail on a modern battlefield. And I think the shortcomings of the Russian army, which arguably was the second greatest military on the planet in February of 22. Now I think there are arguments that they're not the second greatest military in Ukraine, right? So, the reason is because of their people. It's because of the way they're organized, the operational concepts, the trust that's given to an NCO Corps, for example, that we have, that they don't have. The ability to do combined arms because you trust the commander adjacent to you to perform a function for you that's critical. The combined arms, the operational concepts, the advanced training to trust your people, to be able to do things and take initiative. Those are things the Russian army just doesn't have nearly to the degree that a U.S. military has. And I think they're paying the penalty for it. The Wagner Group arguably is the most capable force that they've put in the field. And it's a mercenary force that when they became unhappy with leadership, turned around and marched on the Capitol. Right? That kind of tells you exactly, A, how important the people component of this is, and two, how weak a great technological force can be if you don't take care of the people, the operational concepts, some of those things that we know are important to the way we do business. This has maybe been hit home with the Space Force in spades because, for me, I know we have great equipment. The Space Force has some of the most technologically advanced capabilities that there are in space. But because we designed most of those capabilities for a benign environment decades ago, we have to now recognize that we have to have different operational concepts, different training standards to make sure that our Guardians are trained and ready for great power competition and the likelihood that there could be a contest or a crisis conflict that extends into space. It's going to be a contested environment. We have to be ready for it. It's not just about the equipment, it's about the people. And along those lines, the other broad thing that I've learned is how powerful transparency is. This is a uniquely democratic thing, to really lean forward in transparency. What you just heard from General Brown, what I heard him say is that these issues are very difficult, but he's being transparent by saying, I have to balance all of these things, and I have to weigh the concerns of the few against the broader concerns of the many. And that kind of transparency with leaderships, you don't get that in other countries. You certainly don't get them in autocratic countries like Russia. We saw early on when we exposed some of the ideas that Russia was going to use, false flag operations, et cetera, that transparency altered the nature of the invasion. It certainly altered the timing. And it also altered how a coalition rapidly came together, how NATO rapidly came together to put up a wall of defense and say no further. That kind of transparency is powerful. It is messy. It is difficult in a democracy. Having those discussions is hard. You invite criticism, but that's the power, right? As messy as it is, it gives us a tremendous advantage over autocratic leaders who are not willing to operate in that way. So when we think about the power of the people, giving them the tools they need to do their job, but also the skills, giving them the latitude, empowering them to be creative and innovative, to do other things, that's the power of the U.S. military, I think. And I can see those lessons playing out in spades in Ukraine.
Thank you, sir. Our next round of questions. Secretary Kendall, your question will be, with diversity becoming a hot political issue, with what feels like a good portion of our political leaders opposed to even discussing it, how can the Chaplain Corps continue to champion diversity and inclusion without being considered political or having those efforts shut down? General Brown, your question will be, what was broken with the AEF deployment system that necessitated the shift to AF4Gen? And General Saltzman, your question will be, we know that the key to deterrence of Russia and China is our friendships, our superior allies and partners. What is interoperability and why is it important? Secretary Kendall.
Diversity, great topic. The bottom line is that diversity, as far as I'm concerned, is about readiness. It's about the fact that we live in a diverse country. We're going to have a diverse military. We want to attract people from all parts of the demographics of America, and we want them to reach their full potential. So that's pretty basic. And there's a long history in this country where that has not necessarily been the case, however. So we're conscious of that, and we're trying to attract all the human capital we can get from any part of the population of the country, essentially. And we want all of those people that come in to be able to work to their full potential. And part of that is taking some steps to ensure that we do have things that are equitable and that we treat people the same, that everybody gets treated with respect. It's really pretty basic to me. I think it's a fundamental value. It's not about quotas. We do look at our numbers. We pay attention to that because they're an indicator that maybe there's something we need to do something about. I think diversity is so tightly tied to our readiness and the capabilities of our force that it's an important thing for us to consider. It makes us stronger. There's a lot of research that shows that diverse teams do better at solving problems because you have more perspectives coming in. My experience would support that. I think that's true of my colleagues up here on the stage. So it's something that we see as directly tied to our readiness and our capability as a force, and that's why we pay attention to it. It's quite clear from the studies that we did, just as I came into this role, that we have some significant disparities in different ways that we need to address. I mean, some of those carry over, I think, from the society we live in. We form, to some degree, a community. Being in the military is not just a job. You're part of a community, and your family is often part of that community too. So we pay attention to these things. I just got back from visiting Wyoming, where we're having some issues with how some of our dependents are being treated, being bullied because of their race in schools. We're not going to ignore those things. We're going to work with local communities. We're going to try to address them. So it's an issue that has its roots in this country and in just in the history of human race to some degree when it comes to things like gender and perceptions about people, which we're, I think, moving forward on. But we still have some things to deal with to ensure that everybody can serve to their full potential and that their families are treated with respect wherever they happen to live, things like that. So I see it from that perspective. That's essentially my views on diversity. And I'm tempted to ask my colleagues to talk about that one too, because that's a really important question, but I'll leave that to them.
Actually.
Here we go. Go ahead.
Well, no, it's interesting because I listen to Freakonomics podcast, and they're right now doing it's probably about a month behind, but it's a 3-part series on the whaling industry. And the last episode talks about the value of diversity in the whaling industry back during when they did it. And when they had a more diverse crew, they actually were more effective as a crew and made more money because of just the demographics. And it was African Americans and Portuguese that did a lot of the work. And they basically talked about it was kind of a U. And so as you got more diversity, you got more, you did better. But then as the diversity went away and you spun the cycle the other direction, the productivity went down. And that's to the Secretary's point, because everyone brings something to the table. At the same time, as we do this, we got to make sure that they, it's all about merit. They've got to meet the standard. And we want the best of those, no matter what your background, be put in a position. I've talked about it. I talked about it in my confirmation hearing. I don't want to be selected because of my demographic or discounted because of my demographic. I want you to select me because I'm qualified. Okay, and I think that's what everybody wants. Just an opportunity to be considered and then select me if I'm qualified. But don't discount me because of my demographic and I'm fully qualified. Okay, and then we as leaders have to make sure we think about the teams that we build and who we bring in. Because if you bring in everybody who looks like you, thinks like you, does things exactly like you, you're not going to be a high-powered team. That's why I talk about the Avengers. They all have different superpowers. If they all had the same superpower, would they be the Avengers? Okay, the same thing about our Air Force and our Space Force. If we all looked alike, did alike, and were a very unique organization that was kind of a one-off, we would not be the Air Force and Space Force that we are today.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The problems that we face, the three of us face, are all incredibly complicated, very challenging. By the time it gets to us, the easier problems are solved by great leaders in the field. The tougher problems make their way up. And what we have to have is diversity of thought. What we have to have is different perspectives on an issue if we're going to even get close to a reasonable solution on some of these problems. And I'm just convinced that you can't just tell somebody to think differently. You can't just say in the moment, hey, give me a different perspective. Different perspectives and different ways of thinking are how you grow up, the culture, where you grew up, how you were raised, all of those things that can play out in a diverse population. That's what really brings diversity of thought. That's what really makes, I think, such a powerful, diverse pool of thought leaders so powerful, is that the way they were brought up. The fact that I'm a white male raised in Kentucky is different than an African American male raised somewhere else. It just the way people work, we're gonna be different, and there's power in that. And the more diverse the thoughts is, the better the solution set's gonna be. And we just need to do everything we can to try to encourage that.
Okay, Afrogen, and why AEF is broken. This is based on experience. So since 2011, I've been working global force management in some form or fashion. In that time frame, I was a Deputy Air Component Commander, 2-time Air Component Commander, 2 times at a combatant command working these issues. I could see the Air Force from the outside in some of these. And as we try to get and work through capacity and understanding what we're going to be able to do, the challenge I saw was we really didn't have a good sense of our overall capacity. At the same time, we kept giving. The the analogy I use, it's almost like showing up to school every day. The bully takes your lunch money, and you come back the next day with more lunch money. That's the way the Air Force was being treated. We kept giving, kept giving, kept giving. And my concern was about our own readiness. And by building to a Afrogen cycle to put a bit more structure into and align across the Air Force, because we had different parts of the Air Force. Some wanted to deploy 4 months, some wanted to deploy 6 months, and everybody wanted to be different. When you do that, we have a hard time articulating that to the rest of the joint force, and they play both sides against the middle. And so part of this was to actually get ourselves aligned, and at the same time, start to build teams. You do not have a good all-star team that shows up at the deployed location, and in a high-end conflict that we might have in the future, that we cannot do that. We just can't pick airmen from across the Air Force and go, everybody show up at this one location, and you'll figure it out when you get there, which is what we're able to do in the Middle East right now because we've been doing it because we're a steady state. That's not the way it started. And so we got to better prepare ourselves for what we need to be able to do in the future, which is why the push towards Afrogen, to build teams and also to lay out some level of predictability for our airmen and their families. And then also just talk about the overall capacity of what the Air Force has to offer. We can always pull things forward, but if you do that, you create a hole someplace else. And we've been able to actually, over the course of probably the past 6-7 months, we've actually been able, because of Afrogen and laying in some of this discipline. If you read the National Military Strategy, matter of fact, on the front cover it says strategic discipline. I just felt in some cases we didn't have it. What I'm trying to do is put discipline into this, and then we're able to make the case for, oh yeah, we could do that, but guess what? You're going to have a hole later. And part of this is the aspect of being better able to see ourselves, and for us as an Air Force, be better able to articulate our overall capacity, impact our readiness, and explain that to those that don't wear our uniform. That's part of it is really inside the Pentagon, but it has a larger impact to make sure we're ready if our nation calls. And to talk about our capacity and do that not just for the Air Force, but to explain it to the Joint Force as well. And so it's a work in progress still. There's more work to be done. But it's going to get us on a better path to make sure we are ready when the nation calls.
Thank you, sir.
Deterrence, allies, interoperability. The Secretary has challenged us to make sure that our processes and organizational structures are optimized for great power competition. One of the things that is important as I kind of contemplate that is saying, what are we competing for? And what naturally comes to mind is the idea that we have a strategic advantage under an international rules-based order. I think what our strategic adversaries would say is might makes right. The idea that the strong do what they will and the weak suffer what they must. And there are strategic competitors that think in those terms, and that makes the relationships they build with partners very transactional. We will give you money, you give us loyalty. And like a good loan shark, there will come a day when they come to collect, and they will get what they need. Working with the U.S., I think we build partnerships that are more mutually beneficial. And that comes with a lot of intrusiveness by the U.S. Let's just be honest about that. You're going to work with us, we're going to critique your civil rights. You want to work with us, we're going to critique you on how you treat the press. It's just a part of what we are, the values we have, but the benefit is you're a true partner. And that gets to this interoperability idea. When we look at leveraging allies and partners, our real asymmetric advantage is building mutually beneficial alliances and partnerships that they really feel is a sharing. Both sides will get something out of the relationship. But if you're not interoperable, it becomes more transactional. Give us the data and we'll come to your aid. Okay, how about space domain awareness? Why don't we share the data that we're collecting from our parts of the region, fuse it together, and then we'll all have space domain awareness that will help our safety of flight for all spacecraft on orbit. That's a more mutually beneficial partnership. That's the kind of partnerships that we seek. It just requires high levels of interoperability so the data can be shared, that we're talking in common terms, that we can meet on an operationally relevant timeline to make decisions, et cetera. But there's power in those kind of partnerships that has a deterrent effect, because our adversaries know that we will be able to put a coalition together because of those relationships that we've really taken the time to build, and that gives us a deterrent advantage in my mind.
Thank you, sir. We have just over 3 minutes remaining in this segment, so I invite each of you to give your closing comments in turn, starting with you, Secretary Kendall.
Just again, thank you for what you do for our people. To reiterate what I said at the beginning, we're in a period, I think, of significant stress. It's not going to get less, particularly not over the next couple of years. We need your help in keeping the organization cohesive, keeping our people healthy spiritually and mentally, and helping us deal with all the range of stressors that we're going to be dealing with. For me, the lodestar is our mission and our role in this country in keeping it safe and secure. And you have an enormous contribution to make to ensuring that we are successful in that. So I just want to say thank you. It's good to be with you. Hope you enjoyed the interaction up here. You've got a great leadership team, and I think CQ is going to move on, but Dave Alvin's coming in behind him, and we're all committed to doing everything we can for our airmen and guardians and their families. And we know you feel the same way, so I look forward to working with you as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I would also echo my thanks for what you do. Particularly when you think about as the Secretary highlighted, that some of the challenges that not only we have today, that we've had. You think about a couple of years ago we were in COVID. It seems like so long ago in some aspects, but it was so near as well. And what we were able to collectively work through during that time frame. And having gone out and met airmen that came into our Air Force during COVID, and they have no idea what the Air Force was like before COVID. But it's the aspect of how we were able to work and get through that together. It's the same thing I think we're going to have to be able to do when you think about the challenges that lay ahead. And we can't predict the future. Even the Chaplain Corps can't predict the future. But we can shape it. And I think we all have a responsibility to help shape the future. And the best way we do that is the engagements we have with our airmen and guardians and their families. And because we get the nation's best that raise their right hand and take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And not everybody can do that. And we got to make sure that we take care of those that are willing to make that sacrifice, because it is a sacrifice. In one way or the other, but we do it because we enjoy it. I continue to serve because for two reasons. One, I enjoy it, and two, Shereen lets me. Because she gets a vote. But and that's the key part, is the support you provide to airmen and the guardians, and how that supports them and supports their families helps us in the long run to ensure that we have the best Air Force, Space Force, and Joint Team in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Our people are our most valuable asset. You're on the front lines in the spiritual trenches, trying to make sure that they have what they need to be healthy, resilient, to continue to be optimized to perform an extremely valuable mission. And And like I said at the beginning, you are the force multipliers that make that possible. And we know without that being true, we couldn't do our jobs. The nation couldn't have the kinds of defense that it's come to expect from the military. And so thank you for what you do. Thanks for being those force multipliers out there. And please don't hesitate to reach back to this leadership team. I know I can speak for these two gentlemen. What you need, let us know, because what you're doing is so critical to our success. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.